Hello, welcome to my very first YouTube video and start of my channel. Here in my channel, I share my thoughts and opinions about various things that have been on my mind, mostly related to TV or movies. Today I'm going to be talking about Loving Vincent. Loving Vincent isn't the sort of film I feel needs a spoiler alert just because the themes and composition of the film itself are what makes it impactful, rather than a seat-gripping plot, but nonetheless, spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it. Like many millennials and Zoomers, I, falling somewhere in the middle, have always enjoyed Vincent van Gogh's art and his general vibes as a passionate, struggling artist who only found said passion at age 29. Albeit my enjoyment was largely in passing until I saw Loving Vincent, which cemented my interest in Van Gogh's life and the emotions behind his art. The first time I watched Loving Vincent, I was absolutely enthralled. It had my complete, undivided attention from the moment it began to the moment the credits roll, as if I was put under some sort of hyper-focused spell. Loving Vincent is the first movie to be entirely constructed out of paintings, done of course in Vincent's impressionist style. Scenes were first filmed with actors in costume, and then stills individually painted by hand. 125 oil paintings were involved in the production, quite literally bringing many of Vincent's paintings to life, with over 65,000 frames making up the 94-minute film. The painted animation gives the original 2D pictures the authentic 3D movement their fluid brushstrokes invoke, and the emotion Vincent inevitably must have felt creating them. The film isn't just pretty though, it's as beautiful and touching thematically as it is visually. The plot of the film itself is a mix of fiction and nonfiction. The events of the movie, painted in Vincent's classic style and colors, takes place in 1891, approximately 1 year after his death, and are entirely fictional. There are a number of flashbacks painted in a more realistic black and white style that show previous events in Vincent's life and those leading up to his death, which are more or less true. Most of the speaking characters in the film were real people. They just likely never interacted in the way the film portrays, and their personalities may be exaggerated, if not entirely made up, as Vincent did a lot of paintings during his career, and didn't always record the person's name. The 2017 film follows the character of Armand Roulet, played by Douglas Booth, who is the son of Joseph Roulet, a postman Vincent was friends with while living in Arles, France, and who personally posted Vincent's many letters while living there. We're first introduced to our protagonist outside the night cafe, fighting a man who had been bad-mouthing Vincent. Shortly after, a policeman strolls in and has a conversation with Armand about Vincent's mental instability, describing the circumstances that led to him cutting off part of his ear. In this conversation, we learn that Vincent's old landlord was cleaning when he found a letter Vincent wrote addressed to his brother, Theo. Due to the Postal Service having difficulty locating Theo, Armand's father has entrusted him to deliver the letter. Armand appears to be resentful of this task as he tells the policeman, claiming Vincent to be a nobody that never did anything for them. He goes on to explain how townsfolk even began to dislike Joseph after he refused to sign and protested the circulation of a petition calling for Vincent's removal from Arles. Armand is resentful of how Vincent's presence and friendship with his father damaged their family's reputation, but is still protective against those that disrespect him, such as those who say Vincent was crazy. Later that night, Joseph, played by Chris O'Dowd, retrieves his now drunk son and brings him to the Terrace Cafe at night for some coffee to sober up. There they discuss Vincent and the letter further. In their conversation, Joseph shies away from stating that Vincent committed suicide, leading to one of my favorite exchanges in the movie after Armand points this out.
Killed himself? Why do you find that so hard to believe? You saw what happened here.
He had a breakdown. It happens to people.
They're weak.
Live longer. You'll see. Life can even bring down the strong.
With this scene and throughout, the film does a great job in handling the idea of mental illness, both Vincent's and how mental illness itself was perceived at a time when it was poorly understood and even more poorly judged by others. For those that don't know, Vincent suffered from melancholia, as it was called back then, which was used as a sort of catch-all diagnosis for psychological behavior deemed abnormal. aka most behaviors that didn't fit into the norms of a Western capitalist society. As our understanding of mental illness and neurodivergence has expanded, there has been a lot of speculation over the years about what Vincent more specifically had, which I'll touch on in a bit. But it was well documented that Vincent at the very least struggled with severe depression, suicidal thoughts, and experienced bouts of what could possibly be described as mania. So Joseph pulls out a letter Vincent had sent him just 6 weeks before his death, in which he stated he felt absolutely calm and in a normal state, leaving Joseph suspicious of his supposed suicide. This is important to keep in mind because even if he has his own biases that are less favorable to Vincent, Armand carries these suspicions and his father's defense of the artist with him on his journey. Armand whines about what good one letter would be after all this time, to which Joseph mentions how close the brother were. Vincent wrote Theo a letter almost every day, and how if it was Armand that was dead, Joseph would want the letter, essentially laying on a bit of guilt as parents often do. And so Armand begins his journey. What's really fun about this movie is seeing how the production team brought together so many of Vincent's paintings to construct cohesive three-dimensional environments for Armand to move through, and how they remain true to the style of said paintings across Vincent's career. So you can see there's a subtle contrast between Armand's art style and the rest of his surroundings due to Vincent's artistic evolution. Armand travels to Paris to find that Theo isn't at the address listed on the letter, but is directed by the landlord to talk to Julien Tanguy, a predominant art supplier played by John Sessions. In informing Armand that Theo died about 6 months after Vincent, Julien delivers the line, "Two hearts, one mind," to describe the brothers. I really enjoyed how the movie focused on Theo and Vincent's relationship, which isn't commonly discussed in other media. I mean, besides that Tim Roth movie from 1990, which I haven't seen, so can't speak to it. Despite having a wife and later baby, Theo fully funded Vincent's lifestyle, paying for his food, housing, and art supplies so that Vincent could focus on painting. Vincent had continuous trouble holding down a job before he found his passion for painting, and Theo was the only one to really encourage and support him. Vincent often struggled with feeling like a burden on his brother, but when you take the time to examine the facts and nature of their relationship, it becomes quite obvious that Theo was more than happy to support Vincent for as long as he needed. Because he loved his brother more than anything and could see how intense and important Vincent's passion for painting was. He even named his only child after Vincent. Theo didn't want anything more than Vincent's talents to be recognized and the beauty of his artwork appreciated and admired by the public the same way he relished in them. Theo himself always had health issues growing up, but it's said he went into a sharp decline physically and emotionally after Vincent's death before passing away himself. The portrayal of their relationship really stuck out to me and is a big reason it holds a special place in my heart. When I first watched this movie, I saw a lot of parallels between Vincent and Theo's characters and their relationship, and mine and my sister's relationship. You don't often see or hear about such close and genuinely selfless sibling relationships, even less so in historical contexts. I find media, whether based in fact or fiction, tends to portray siblings as amicable but not particularly noteworthy or explicitly antagonistic. But we're as much of a byproduct of our siblings as we are of our parents. In a lot of cases, our siblings probably have an even bigger effect since they're more likely to know what's going on in each other's social lives and inner thoughts and feelings. I definitely wouldn't be the person I am today without my older siblings, particularly my sister. We've always tried to be each other's Theo in a sense, as best as we could, of course, within our own emotional and financial situations. It was actually Vincent who originally described himself and Theo as two hearts, one mind to Julien. The line really resonated with me and actually inspired me to get my second ever and to the day largest tattoo as a permanent reminder of not only mine and my sister's bond, but of theirs too. I don't remember if I read it before or after getting my tattoo, but while doing a bit of research about the brothers after watching Loving Vincent, I came across the book Vincent and Theo, the Van Gogh Brothers by Deborah Halligan. It actually came out the same year as the movie. It is an amazing book and does a great job detailing their personalities and lives. I would definitely recommend anyone interested to go check that out as well. I couldn't put it down once I started. Julian goes on to tell Armand how Vincent never left a suicide note, and despite spending his last day with Theo, insists they talk about life, not death, leaving him without any sort of answer or explanation. Vincent also visited Julian after getting discharged from a mental institution, and seemed more calm and sure of himself than Julian had ever seen. Although there is no one in Paris Armand can give the letter to, instead of heading home, Julian directs him to Auvers-sur-Oise to visit the doctor Vincent stayed with for the 6 weeks before his death, Dr. Gachet. Before sending him on his way, Julian comments how many believe Vincent to be a martyr for art, but he himself isn't so sure. The rest of the movie takes place in Auvers, with Armand meeting several other people Vincent painted, learning more about their perceptions of him and Vincent's last few weeks alive in the town. At this point in the film, Armand is pretty confused. Everyone he talks to has differing viewpoints about Vincent and his death. Some say he was perfectly happy beforehand, others say he was upset and felt like a burden. Some people think he was suspicious and manipulative, others say he was kind. It's through these conflicting discussions Armand becomes more and more interested in trying to find out why exactly Vincent died, as if trying to find a proper explanation for it. In a lot of ways, Armand represents the audience. Although Armand was a real person who would have met and interacted with Van Gogh, the movie portrays him as having more of an adjacent acquaintanceship to Vincent because of his father. Armand knew of Vincent and his activities and reputation more than in a personal sense. So at the beginning of the film, Armand starts with many of the same facts and impressions the average person today knows about Vincent van Gogh. He was quote-unquote crazy/mentally unstable, cut off part of his ear, and committed suicide. I'll admit, even as a passive admirer, I didn't know much more than this when I first watched the movie myself. But none of these facts actually tell us about who Vincent van Gogh was as a four-dimensional human being. Then as the film progresses, we get more of the complexity that moves Vincent from an idea, this character of the past, to a regular person that lived and breathed, someone we can generally relate to and empathize with. This expansion of Vincent's life and personality, and even the investigation into his death, helped dismantle the myth of the tortured artist that has often seemed synonymous with his name. Julian alluded to this a bit when Armand visited him. There's this pervasive romanticized idea that artists make great art because of their personal struggles. Even today, when mental illness continues to become more recognized and accepted, creatives often worry about how seeking treatment might diminish their creative output or legitimacy as an artist. In a small study conducted by psychologists at the University of Southampton, 2 groups of people were shown a picture of Vincent's sunflowers. Half were told the artist suffered from erratic behavior and mutilated part of his body, while the other half weren't told anything. The half that were told about Vincent's eccentricism evaluated the art more positively than the other group, which is pretty fucked up. The article I pulled this information from rightly pointed out that we do not view the works of Jane Austen, John Milton, or Igor Stravinsky as any less deserving of credit simply because their works did not come from a place of instability. Not to mention, people often forget that Vincent made some of his best pieces when he was in active treatment. He painted Starry Night, one of the most recognizable pieces of Western art and widely regarded as Van Gogh's magnum opus while in an asylum. He was inspired by the view from his window at night. It was at this same asylum he painted Irises and the Blue Self-Portrait. Even if this mythos of good or justifiable struggle were true, I'd much rather lose some of the great art that exists in the world and have healthy and happy people than the alternative. Because at the end of the day, people are worth more than what they create or do for others, which is definitely an idea Vincent seems to struggle with. He felt this intense need to make it as an artist because doing so would mean his burdening of his brother would be worth it in the end. He'd be able to be seen as respectable by his parents and peers. In my research, I also came across this short but succinct article titled "The Tortured Artist is a Dangerous and Damaging Stereotype" by Kelsey Karpinski, and the last 2 paragraphs really stuck out to me. The tortured artist trope romanticizes suffering and treats it as a conduit to a higher form of creativity. It encourages burnout and unhealthy coping mechanisms that hinder artists far more than helping them. Art should be an act of beautiful creation, not some misguided attempt to revel in agony. It's not poignant that Plath's life imitated her art. It's tragic her mental anguish robbed the world of both her art and her life. That tragedy should inspire efforts such as more comprehensive mental health education to ensure nothing like this happens again. The myth of the tortured artist should be treated less as an unavoidable consequence and more as a call to action. While I completely agree with the two articles, and there's no doubt creatives as a whole have historically and continue to be looked down upon by society, I think there is also something to be said about how there's a strange culture around painters specifically. What I mean by this is that there is a heightened sense of scarcity when it comes to the creation, buying, and selling of physical paintings. Even if an artist were to replicate their own painting, it would still never be an exact replica. From how and where the brushstrokes are laid to the paint being used, whether it's hand mixed or from a tube, two swatches of the same color are never exactly the same shade or hue. This is true today, but even more so in historical context because processes were more varied between manufacturers. Alternatively, the artists previously mentioned were all writers, with Stravinsky being the exception as a pianist and composer. The creations of these artists are inherently repetitive by nature. Books are meant to be replicated so that they can be published and shared. Sheet music is meant to be played and heard multiple times, and after the composer dies, it can continue to be played. There's a lot less risk or concern of deterioration because the duplication of these works don't affect the work itself in the same way as paintings. And yes, it would be really unfortunate to lose the original manuscripts of Shakespeare's plays, for example, but we have also copied down said plays for infinite prosperity. There have also always been manufactured pieces of art, and creating prints is a lot less tedious nowadays than it would have been in Van Gogh's time. However, a lot of people could tell you that seeing a painting in person compared to a flat print can and does have different effects on the viewer. While the overall effect and experience of reading the first printed edition of a book versus the 100th printed edition is pretty indistinguishable. There are, of course, those that do collect first or second edition of books, and they are highly valuable. However, there isn't the same sort of impression of status with that sort of ownership as there is that comes with owning a one of a kind painting. Unfortunately, because of this, a lot of people have come to value art as a means to raise one's impression of status within society, as a sort of self serving object and activity of the elites, rather than value its visual beauty and the effort that went into its creation, resulting in a strange dichotomy in which art is only valued if it's exorbitantly expensive and displayed in fancy, exclusive galleries, or it isn't valued at all, and those that dedicate their time to it are misguided fools treated with contempt. Yet there is undeniably an increase in value if an artist was mentally ill, and even more so if they died before becoming recognized by society at large. Monet, for example, said to be the founder of Impressionism, had a lot of trouble selling and getting his artwork into galleries because his style went against artistic norms of the time. He did eventually become successful, isn't said to have had any major health issues, and lived into his 80s. Then there's Picasso, another foundational artist who also struggled for recognition but was successful in his lifetime, and well known for his eccentricism, living until 91. Now, if we were to compare only the reputations and societal hype, not their art, of Monet, Picasso, and Van Gogh, there is no competition who would come out on top, bringing us full circle back to the pervasiveness of the tortured artist mythos. Mental illness or socioeconomic struggle has come to be viewed as a sort of equalizer for those supposedly preordained with artistic talent. This might be a hot take, I'm not sure, but nobody is born talented. What people view as talent is in actuality refined skills combined with personal passion and a unique perspective on the world. Everyone possesses the latter, and it is one's passion in a subject that is the driving force for improvement of the skills involved. Recognizing this by no means diminishes artists, if anything, acknowledging how much time and effort has been put into a craft leading up to the creation of what could be called a masterpiece makes it infinitely more meaningful, especially because creatives are their own hardest critics. When we looked at Vincent's Sunflowers or Starry Night, we don't see the first few times he picked up a paintbrush, or the hundreds of hours spent on previous sketches or paintings. We don't see his progression as an artist up to that defining point. All of this ultimately begs the question, how do we get to a place where we can start to properly appreciate and support artists while they're still with us? Okay, so that was a long tangent. Let's get back to the movie. In his investigation, Armand ends up figuring out the gun Vincent used belonged to the owner of the inn he stayed at, but that sometime before, the inn owner sold it to a local boy that Vincent hung around with sometimes and who had often played jokes on Vincent. Armand later heads over to the house of the medical doctor that examined Vincent after the shooting, who states that, based on the angle, there's no way Vincent could have shot himself. The circumstances of Vincent's death thus appear to be very strange. The fact that Vincent carried all of his supplies out to the field in the morning, shot himself in the stomach instead of the head, then hobbled back to the inn where he later died. Armand questions whether he may have actually wanted to live after all and regretted shooting himself, or was in fact murdered. Towards the finale, Armand is confronted by Dr. Gachet's daughter, Marguerite, played by Saoirse Ronan, who talks about how Vincent was a genius and criticizes Armand's accusation of his death as a murder, resulting in one of my favorite scenes of the film.
It must have been someone else. It must have been.
So lonely Vincent resorts to hanging around with drunken teenagers and he gets shot. Or he shoots himself in despair at his lonely life. The result is the same. Either way, instead, he could have been at our place painting, if I'd behaved differently. If him and my father hadn't argued.
But don't you care that some bastard may have gotten away with murder?
You want to know so much about his death. But what do you know of his life?
I know that he tried hard to prove he was good for something.
Yes. He did.
You want to know so much about his death, but what do you know about his life? Throughout the movie, Armand desperately tries to find some other explanation for Vincent's death other than it being a suicide, as if it would somehow be more meaningful otherwise. Those are the parts Armand clings to, but if you pay closer attention, there are also a number of positive memories or characteristics people share about Vincent in the short time they knew him. This is why I don't necessarily agree with modern attempts to posthumously diagnose the disorders Vincent may have had. Doing so doesn't change anything and has the potential to cause more harm than good. Mental illness doesn't provide any sort of justification for death. It can certainly provide insight into how a person's struggles may have led to it, but it doesn't mean their death was inevitable in any sort of way, and therefore somehow less tragic or heartbreaking. As Marguerite Gachet's speech shows, death is unfortunate regardless of how it happens. The after effects are nonetheless the same, whether murder or suicide. Part of the reason this movie has such a resonating effect is that the sense of loss and grief that Vincent's death has left on all those that knew him is palpable from the start to finish. Those who knew and cared for him are not so much upset on the semantics of how he died, just that he is gone. You can feel the tragic irony of Vincent being so loved but never being able to fully recognize it. In the words of my sister, what is grief but love with nowhere to go? The movie leads you to believe that it is about sorting out the circumstances of Vincent's death, but more than anything, it is about his life. And in doing so demonstrates that although it may not always feel true, there are people who care about us, someone whose life was made better by our existence, even if only for a little while, be that a few years, a few weeks, or just a few minutes. No one leaves this world without making some kind of mark. It's with this messaging the painted animation is able to possess and reflect the same emotional tension and complexities as Van Gogh's original works, and why I haven't been able to get it off my mind in the years since. Vincent may not have initiated his death, but constantly feeling like a burden on his brother and others, it's likely he was ultimately at peace with its imminence. Many people who have dealt with suicidal thoughts or even attempts have commented that even when they are happy, the thought of death or even just non-existence is always there, lurking in the background. Dr. Gachet tells Armand that on his deathbed, Vincent remarked, "Maybe it is better for everyone." A number of sources report that according to Theo, Vincent's last words were, "The sadness will last forever." Vincent van Gogh was remarkable not just because of his art, but because of his dedication and unrelenting kindness in spite of living in an unkind world while dealing with his own constant struggles. So many millennials and Zoomers have a special place in their heart for Van Gogh because his life contains many universally felt and relatable traits. The circumstances of his life and death are not tragic just because he was an inspirational and in turn revolutionary artist, but because there has been and continues to be so many like him that are mistreated, ignored, and ultimately failed by society. In his own words, Vincent simply wanted to prove what a non-entity has in his heart, and who in this world doesn't want and deserve that. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Feel free to share your own thoughts and feelings about the movie in the comments below, or even just how Vincent van Gogh's work might have touched your life. Before I sign off, I want to give a quick shout out to Theo's wife, Joanna van Gogh, because she's actually a big reason for Vincent's posthumous fame within the mainstream art world. She was always really supportive of Theo supporting Vincent, and after their respective deaths, devoted the rest of her life to carrying out their legacies. She began cataloging and in 1914 published the first volume of the letters Vincent wrote to Theo. She also organized a number of exhibitions of Vincent's paintings throughout her life. She's a pretty amazing lady, so I definitely recommend reading more about her. After her death, her son and grandson carried on the torch, and it was because of their cumulative efforts the Van Gogh Museum was eventually established in Amsterdam in 1973.